The Galactic Academy of Zilara was the most advanced military training center in the Orion Arm. Its students came from hundreds of worlds, tall insectoids from Run, silver-scaled reptilians from Ura, and the proud, crystal-skinned Zilarians themselves. Humans were rare here. Their homeworld was small, poor, and scarred by wars. To most alien species, humans were considered primitive, too emotional, too impulsive, too fragile. Virathil never understood why the galaxy still talked about them. She was a top student of Zilara, sharp-minded and logical. Her people believed in reason above emotion and control above chaos. To her, humans represented the opposite, reckless survivors with no discipline, who somehow stumbled through history by accident and luck. One afternoon, she sat in the wide lecture hall of Galactic History 203. The topic on the hollow board glowed bright blue. The Terran Defense Wars, when humans stood alone. Professor Odan, an old grown scholar with a voice that sounded like grinding metal, began his lecture. In the year 2447, he said, the Varkon Empire launched a full-scale invasion on the Terran colonies. Against all logic, the humans held the line for 7 days, without reinforcements. Several students shifted in their seats. Virathil rolled her glowing eyes. 7 days? Against the Varkon fleet? That's absurd, she whispered to her friends. How can soft-skinned creatures resist a race with plasma armor and dreadnought ships? Her friend Lirak, a feathered avian, chuckled. Maybe they use their legendary hero speeches to scare the enemy away. A few students laughed quietly. Even Professor Odan paused, his gaze turning toward them. Miss Virathil, he said slowly, do you find something amusing about one of the most famous military events in galactic history? Yes, Professor, Virathil replied boldly. I find it amusing that myths are being taught as fact. Humans cannot fight off an empire. Their physiology is weak, their reaction time is slow, and their strategy primitive. I believe this story is exaggerated propaganda. The hall went silent. All eyes turned toward her. In the back corner of the room, a single human sat quietly. Captain Elias Grant, a visiting instructor and exchange officer from the Terran Defense Fleet. He had been listening silently since the lecture began. Professor Odan folded his arms. Your opinion is noted, Virathil. Perhaps you will appreciate the truth better through action. Tomorrow we begin a live combat simulation. You and Captain Grant will share command of your unit. Virathil's smooth crystal skin flickered in surprise. With him? She said, glancing at the human in the back. Captain Grant stood slowly. He was not impressive by alien standards. Average height, plain face, short dark hair, and eyes like cold iron. His uniform was simple, without medals or ornaments. Yet something about his stillness carried quiet authority. Yes, Odan confirmed. We shall see whether human instincts are myth or fact. The next day, the training arena buzzed with energy. The simulation was famous among cadets. It recreated real battlefield conditions inside a holographic dome that stretched for miles. Artificial cities, damaged vehicles, smoke, and sounds of distant battle filled the air. Virathil's team gathered around her, confident and sharp. She wore silver combat armor that gleamed under the lights. Her crystalline eyes focused on the digital map projected in front of them. Captain Grant stood at the edge of the group, checking his gear silently. His armor was old-fashioned, painted gray and worn from use. He carried only a rifle, a knife, and a strange calmness that made the younger cadets uneasy. Virathil turned toward him. Captain Grant, I will lead this mission. You will follow my orders. Understood? Grant nodded once. Understood. The mission was simple: hold the simulated city against waves of drone enemies. The more enemies destroyed, the higher the team's score. Virathil's plan was precise. Position troops on high ground, use drones for scanning, and set automatic turrets at choke points. We rely on data, she told her squad. Emotions only create chaos. The simulation began. The ground shook as the first wave of enemy drones appeared, pouring through the ruined streets. Virathil issued rapid commands, confident in her strategy. Energy beams lit the sky as her squad opened fire. For a few minutes, everything worked perfectly. Then suddenly the enemy changed tactics. The drones split into 3 groups, flanking from the sides and above. They cut off the communication lines and destroyed the scanning drones. "Adjust position," Virathil shouted. But before her order reached the squads, explosions shook the upper floors. 2 soldiers screamed as their armor overloaded. The formation collapsed. Captain Grant moved fast. He grabbed Virathil by the arm and pulled her behind cover just before another blast tore through the street. "They're targeting your command relay," he said calmly. Virathil pulled free, angry. "You are not in charge here, Captain." He didn't argue. Instead, he pressed a hand against his earpiece, scanning the static-filled channels. "Team Bravo, fall back 2 blocks north. Use the smoke for cover. Delta, rig the power grid. Give me an EMP burst in 30 seconds. Those units are too far." Virathil protested. Grant didn't reply. He was already moving, fast, efficient, confident. He sprinted through debris, taking precise shots that dropped enemy drones one after another. His commands were short and firm, no wasted words. The soldiers followed him almost automatically. Within a minute, the EMP pulse flashed across the battlefield. The enemy drones froze midair, systems fried. Grant signaled the counterattack, and the squad advanced with renewed force. When the smoke cleared, the city stood silent. The simulation timer froze. "Mission complete." Virathil stood stunned. "That wasn't part of my plan," she whispered. Grant turned to her. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Plans break. People don't. Not if you train them right." Later, as they left the arena, the other cadets whispered among themselves. Many had seen the way Grant moved, how he commanded, not like a simulation officer, but like someone who had lived through real battles. Virathil couldn't stop thinking about it. She had studied hundreds of wars, but nothing in the records showed that kind of instinct. It was as if he could feel the fight before it began. In the locker area, she finally spoke to him. "Captain, how did you know the drones would flank?" He paused while removing his gloves. "They always do," he said simply. "Enemies test the edges first. If you've been on enough real fronts, you can feel it before you see it." She frowned. But there was no data, no sign of movement. Grant gave a faint smile. "You're looking for data. I'm looking for patterns of fear, hesitation, and pressure. War isn't numbers, Vera. It's people trying not to die." Her crystal skin dimmed slightly, a Zalarian sign of confusion. "That's barbaric, maybe," he said quietly, "but it's how we survived." He walked away, leaving her standing in silence. That night, Virathil couldn't sleep. Her logical mind kept replaying the battle. The precision of his movements, the quickness of his decisions, it wasn't luck. It was experience born from something she couldn't define. She opened her holoscreen and accessed the Galactic archives. Search, Terran Defense Wars. Thousands of records appeared. She opened one. The first report described human soldiers standing against an empire that outnumbered them 10 to 1. Civilians helped build barricades. Old ships were turned into bombs. Communication lines were made from copper wires and stolen parts. They fought for 7 days, not because they expected to win, but because surrender wasn't in their vocabulary. Virathil leaned back slowly, feeling a strange heaviness in her chest. For the first time, she began to wonder. Maybe the legends weren't myths. Maybe they were memories of people like Captain Grant, people who refused to break. The next morning, the academy buzzed with talk of the simulation. "Did you see that human move?" one cadet said. "He fought like a machine." "No, like a predator," another whispered. Virathil passed by silently, her pride stung but her curiosity alive. When she reached the training grounds, she saw Captain Grant already there, running drills alone before sunrise. His breath came slow and steady, his eyes focused. There was no arrogance in him, only discipline. For the first time in her life, Virathil felt something she had never associated with humans, respect mixed with unease. She still didn't believe all the legends. But now, deep inside, a small voice whispered a question she couldn't silence. The next few days at the Galactic Academy were unusually quiet. Whispers followed Captain Elias Grant wherever he went. The story of the human victory in the simulation had spread fast. Some called it luck. Others said the simulation system had glitched. But a few, those who saw it with their own eyes, knew better. Virathil was one of them. She tried to convince herself it didn't matter. The human had only won because of chance. He had guessed correctly, that was all. Still, every time she closed her eyes, she saw his calm face under fire, his voice steady when everyone else had panicked. No fear, no hesitation. It didn't make sense. Humans were supposed to be the most fragile species in the academy. She'd told herself to forget it. But curiosity grew like a spark that refused to die. The following week, the Academy's training command announced a joint challenge, a live combat simulation between elite teams from different species. The goal was to test leadership under pressure. Each team would have to survive a 24-hour simulation against waves of adaptive AI enemies. When the assignment list appeared on the holoboard, Virathil's name was there. So was Captain Elias Grant's. Her chest tightened. Again? They're pairing me with him again? Lyrak, her feathered avian friend, gave a teasing laugh. Looks like the professors want to see if the myth can save you twice. Virathil folded her arms. I don't need saving. Sure, Lyrak said, his feathers twitching with amusement. Just don't get in the way when the human starts his miracle routine again. She shot him a glare but said nothing. The simulation began inside a massive desert battlefield. Cracked earth, ruined towers and orange skies. Each cadet wore armor connected to neural sensors. The system tracked pain, fatigue, and fear to make the scenario as real as possible. The mission was simple. Defend an energy core at the center of the map for 24 simulated hours. But there was a twist. Enemy drones adapted to every strategy used against them. Virathil gathered her squad, showing them her plan. We will create layered defense rings, she explained. No chaos, no improvisation. Every move will be calculated. Grant stood beside her, arms crossed. And if the enemy changes tactics faster than you can calculate? She turned to him. Then we adapt logically. He gave a short nod. We'll see. The first few hours went smoothly. Virathil's plan worked as expected. Drones attacked from predictable angles and her turrets tore them apart. Confidence returned to her team. Even Virathil began to relax, but then the ground started shaking. The AI enemies suddenly changed strategy. They burrowed underground, bypassing the outer defenses. Explosions ripped through the camp. Smoke filled the air. Impossible, Virathil shouted. That's not in the data. Because the AI learned from you, Grant said calmly, already moving through the dust. You're fighting a mirror of your own thinking. He didn't wait for permission. He began giving rapid orders. Split the team. Move supply crates to the north ridge. Use the smoke for cover. Take the high ground. Virathil wanted to protest. He wasn't supposed to lead. But her people were panicking, running in circles, waiting for orders. Without Grant's voice, they would be crushed. She clenched her jaw and followed. Grant ducked under falling debris, dragging a wounded cadet to safety. He moved like someone who had done it 100 times before. He didn't shout in panic. He barked clear, short commands that cut through the chaos. You! Cover fire, you! Reinforce that wall! Move now! The soldiers obeyed without question. His calm steadiness became an anchor in the storm. Within minutes, the battle shifted. Grant led a small strike team underground through the same tunnels the enemy had used. Virathil followed, her pulse racing. The tunnels were dark and narrow, filled with mechanical echoes and sparks. How do you know where to go? She asked, whispering. Grant pointed at the walls. Fresh dust here. Means they passed through recently. He pressed his ear to the rock. Hear that? Vibration stronger that way. Virathil listened and realized he was right. She had studied tactical data all her life, but she had never seen someone feel the battlefield like this. When they reached the enemy's command node, Grant raised a hand. We can't shoot it. It's shielded. Then what do we do? She asked. He pulled out 2 small metal spheres from his belt, old-fashioned grenades. Virathil frowned. Explosives. Those are primitive. He smiled faintly. Sometimes primitive still works. He tossed the grenades. The explosion shook the ground above. The enemy drones froze mid-motion. The shield flickered and vanished. Now, Grant shouted. They opened fire, destroying the core. When they surfaced again, the simulation sky turned blue, signaling mission success. The squad cheered. But Verathil stood silent, watching him. His face was covered in dust, a small cut bleeding near his temple. He didn't look proud. He looked tired, like someone who had done this too many times. "How did you stay so calm?" she finally asked. Grant wiped the dust from his face. "Panic kills faster than bullets." "That's not logic," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "It's experience." Later that night, back in the academy cafeteria, the cadets replayed the simulation footage. They talked excitedly about how the human had saved the mission again. Some called him a natural-born killer. Others called him lucky. Verathil sat apart, staring at the screen. She watched his movements frame by frame. Every step, every decision, every look in his eyes, it was all deliberate. There was nothing random about it. Professor Odan joined her. "You seem troubled, Verathil." "I don't understand," she admitted. "Humans are not supposed to be this skilled. Their technology is outdated. Their biology weak. How can one outperform half the academy?" Odin smiled faintly. "Because humans are not built to win. They are built to survive. And when survival becomes habit, it looks a lot like victory." Verathil frowned. "That sounds like chaos." "It is," Odin said. "And yet, they turn chaos into art." The next morning, the academy hosted a debriefing session. Each team presented what they learned. When it was Verathil's turn, she hesitated. She looked around the hall, at the proud Zalarians, the logical Urin, the disciplined Rune soldiers, all trained to think like machines. Then her eyes found Grant, sitting silently at the back as always. "I learned something unexpected," she began. They don't fight the way we do. They don't rely only on logic or numbers. They rely on something deeper. Instinct, adaptability, a kind of madness that somehow brings order." The room murmured. Some aliens frowned. Others looked surprised. Verathil continued, her tone steady. "I used to think human stories were myths. I thought their victories were accidents. Now I know they come from something real, something earned." She sat down, her heart racing. Grant didn't say anything, but when she glanced his way, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't pride, it was respect. Later that evening, Verathil went to the observation deck of the academy. The stars stretched endlessly across the dark sky. She found Grant there too, sitting quietly, looking out at the void. "You were watching the stars?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Old habit. Humans used to look at them and dream of reaching them. Now that we just stare and remember what it cost." She sat beside him. "Do all humans fight like you?" "No," he said simply. "Most don't. But every human can if they have to. We don't like war, Vera. We just learned to be good at it because the universe never gave us a choice." She looked at him silently for a moment. "Maybe that's what makes you dangerous." He shook his head. "No. That's what makes us human." When Verathil returned to her dorm later that night, she opened her holoscreen again. She watched the battle footage one last time. The explosions, the chaos, the calm human voice guiding them through it. Then she played an old Terran quote she had found in the archives. "In war, the strongest weapon is not the sword or the gun, but the will to stand when all others fall." For the first time in her life, Verathil felt something new, admiration. She didn't know it yet. But this challenge was only the beginning. Soon a real war would come to the stars. The quiet of the Galactic Academy did not last long. Reports arrived from the border systems, outposts that had not sent messages in weeks. Entire colonies were disappearing, and the cause was clear. The Krell Dominion, a brutal and warlike species, had begun a sweeping invasion. The news spread through the academy like fire. Students and instructors gathered in the lecture halls, their faces tense. Verathil sat among them, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the human she had just witnessed, Captain Grant, and the way he moved, fought, and commanded. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that humans were more than stories in a history book. A message from the Academy's command console interrupted her thoughts. "Cadets Verathil and Grant, report to the Forward Defense Unit immediately. Full combat deployment." Her pulse quickened. This was not another simulation. This was real. She found Grant already waiting, leaning against a wall as if he had known she would arrive last. His armor was heavier than the training gear. dented and scarred from previous campaigns, but he carried himself with the same calm authority she had seen in simulations. "Ready for the real thing?" she asked. Grant looked at her with the same icy calm. "You don't get ready for war. Vera. You survive it." Her skin flickered in irritation, a Zalarian sign of tension, but she nodded silently. The forward defense unit was a sprawling network of fortified towers, defensive turrets, and holographic control stations, positioned on the border planet of Thasser 7. The Krell had already begun their advance. Orbital scans showed massive fleets descending, dropping troops and machines onto the planet's surface. Verathil walked past alien soldiers preparing for combat. Many of them, especially young cadets, whispered about humans behind her back. "Don't count on him," one Rune officer said, feathers ruffling. "Humans are weak. Their weapons are outdated." Verathil shook her head. She remembered the calm, decisive way Grant had led their simulations. Weak? He was the opposite. The first attack came at dusk. Massive Krell walkers stomped across the desert, supported by flying drones that released plasma fire. The forward defense unit fired back, but the aliens were uncoordinated. Confusion spread. Verathil saw it immediately. Alien squads were panicking, retreating without orders. Commands were lost in the chaos. Grant stepped forward, calm as ever. "Listen up." His voice carried across comm channels. "Form up at Grid 7. Cover the North Ridge. Focus fire on the walkers. Move." Even through the noise and destruction, soldiers obeyed. Verathil followed him, trying to keep up. She had led teams before, but never in conditions like this. The Krell were relentless, their machines adaptive, their soldiers vicious. Yet wherever Grant moved, order returned. His presence was a stabilizing force, a single point around which chaos seemed to bend. Hours passed. Drones exploded, walkers fell, and the aliens fought valiantly under Grant's direction. Verathil fought too, her crystalline blades slicing through Krell armor. But she noticed something strange. The humans, led by Grant, were everywhere at once. Not literally, of course, but he seemed to anticipate where the battle would be, appearing in the exact location where soldiers were about to falter. She ducked behind a collapsed tower as plasma fire scorched the ground. "How can one man be everywhere?" she muttered. Grant appeared beside her, dragging a wounded Run soldier to safety. "I'm not everywhere," he said calmly. "I just move where the fight matters most." Verathil opened her mouth, but he was already gone, sprinting across the battlefield to reinforce another weak point. By nightfall, the Krell had breached the outer walls. Their machines smashed through barricades, and their troops swarmed forward. The aliens faltered. Verathil's heart raced. For the first time, she felt true fear. Not for herself, she had been trained to fight, but for those who relied on her. She realized the simulations had only hinted at the scale of real war. "Vera, cover the energy core!" Grant's voice came through comms. She raced to her post, firing at the incoming Krell. Her squad was dwindling fast. One by one, soldiers fell, their cries echoing through the night. And then she saw him. Grant was leading the countercharge. Plasma shots flew around him, yet he moved steadily, calmly, as if he were immune to danger. He dodged a massive energy blast, rolled and fired 3 precise shots, taking out the enemy leader. He grabbed a fallen soldier, lifted him onto his shoulder, and sprinted into the fray, giving clear orders at every step. Verathil's chest tightened. This was not simulation. This was life and death, and he was unmatched. The battle continued for hours. Krell after Krell attacked, and Grant adapted instantly. When a drone swarm came from the east, he sent the alien units to form a wall of fire and smoke, trapping the drones in a temporary loop. When a walker advanced from the north, he called for a coordinated missile strike using old, damaged turrets that everyone else had written off. Verathil watched, awestruck. Every move was logical yet instinctive. Every command considered yet immediate. Why are they so strong? She whispered to herself. A Uran cadet beside her, shaking and bruised, answered, "Humans, and they survive. They adapt. That's all there is to it." Verathil nodded slowly. It wasn't just strength or weapons. It was willpower, stubbornness, and a deep-rooted determination to keep standing when everything else falls. As dawn approached, the Krell began to retreat. Their forces were diminished and their machines disabled. The forward defense unit had suffered heavy losses, but the planet was saved. Vera Thill stood amidst the ruins, her armor scorched and her mind racing. She saw the bodies of alien soldiers, some she had trained with, fallen in battle. She saw human soldiers tending to the wounded, including one familiar figure, Captain Grant. He moved among them quietly, checking wounds, giving water, adjusting armor, and ensuring everyone survived. Not a word of pride, not a single boast, just methodical care, as if the lives of his comrades were his responsibility above all else. Vera Thill felt a strange mix of awe and guilt. She had mocked humans once. She had laughed at their legends. Now she realized that legends were born from truth. After the battle, the forward defense unit gathered to debrief. Vera Thill found herself standing beside Grant. She had wanted to speak to him all night, but words felt too small. Finally, she managed. "Captain, I didn't believe the stories before. I thought humans exaggerated. I thought they were weak. I was wrong." Grant looked at her quietly. "You don't have to say that," he said softly. "You just have to understand. Humans survive because we have to. That's all. No myths, no legends. Just survival." Vera Thill's eyes flickered. She had never heard a human speak with such honesty, and somehow it felt noble. That evening, she returned to her quarters. She could not sleep. She pulled up the archives again, searching for battles she had dismissed as exaggeration. And now she read them differently. Reports of humans holding colonies against impossible odds. Accounts of soldiers sacrificing themselves to save civilians. Stories of desperation turned into victory. Each one carried the same message. Humans did not fight because they wanted to, or because they were strong. They fought because they refused to lose. Vera Thill understood, for the first time, why humans were dangerous. Not because of technology, not because of numbers, not because of skill, but because of sheer will. The next morning, the Academy announced that humans would be recognized as strategic defense partners. The decision was unprecedented. Many alien cadets grumbled, but Vera Thill felt a quiet satisfaction. She watched the human soldiers, including Grant, train with alien cadets. They moved differently, graceful but relentless, disciplined but adaptive. Every movement reminded her that humans were not just survivors, they were warriors. For the first time, Vera Thill felt a sense of humility. Not the weakness she had once thought humans possessed, but a strength that no Zalarian logic could teach. She made a quiet vow to herself. She would learn from them. She would study them not to copy, but to understand the force that had allowed a fragile species to stand against impossible odds. The sky above the planet Variant 6 burned red. Explosions flashed across the horizon like angry stars. The ground shook under the weight of heavy bombardment. Vera Thill stood near the defense trench, her heart racing. For the first time in her life, she felt true fear. The Krell Dominion had arrived earlier than expected. Their ships fell from orbit like fireballs, landing troops across the surface in waves. The alien fortress city trembled under constant fire. Soldiers ran through smoke and debris, shouting orders and carrying wounded. The air smelled of metal, smoke, and terror. Vera Thill's fingers trembled as she adjusted her communicator. Her team had scattered in the chaos. Somewhere on the front lines, Captain Elias Grant was commanding what remained of the defense forces. "Vera," came Grant's voice through the static. "Get to the Western Trench. Bring anyone you can find. We hold the line there." "Understood," she replied, though her voice cracked. She ran through the ruins, ducking under broken walls and dodging flying debris. Plasma fire hissed past her. Alien soldiers, Zalarians, Torth, even a few humans fought side by side. Yet the Krell kept coming. Their dark armor glistened, their weapons tearing through defenses like paper. When Vera reached the Western Trench, she saw Grant standing tall amid the smoke. His armor was scorched, his face smeared with dirt, but his eyes were calm, cold and focused like steel. He was shouting orders to nearby troops. "Load the artillery," he barked. "Keep the fire steady. No retreat." Vera couldn't understand how he stayed so composed. The soldiers around him looked exhausted and terrified, yet they obeyed without question. Grant's voice carried authority, the kind that made people believe they could still win. She approached him, panting. "Captain, the eastern flank has collapsed. The Krell are pushing through." "I know," he said, checking his wrist display. "They're trying to encircle us. We'll make them pay for every meter." He turned to her. "You wanted to see what human warfare looks like, right? Stay close." Before she could reply, the Krell launched another assault. Hundreds of them charged across the battlefield, roaring through their helmets. Their heavy walkers fired plasma cannons, melting through metal barricades. Grant didn't flinch. He grabbed a fallen soldier's rifle and climbed out of the trench. "Cover fire," he shouted. Without hesitation, the humans and aliens in his unit followed. Plasma bolts and railgun shots cut through the air. Grant moved like a shadow, fast, precise, ruthless. He fired short, controlled bursts, hitting enemies with deadly accuracy. When his rifle overheated, he drew his sidearm and kept moving. Vera watched in awe. The captain wasn't just fighting, he was leading through action. Soldiers who had been panicking moments ago now shouted in unity, following his commands. The Krell reached the first line of defense. Grant switched to close combat. He used his combat knife, cutting through the enemy's armor joints, striking fast and deadly. His movements weren't graceful. They were efficient. Brutal. A Krell warrior twice his size charged him, swinging a plasma blade. Grant dodged narrowly, grabbed the creature's arm and drove his knife into its neck. The alien fell, twitching. Grant didn't stop. Vera ducked behind a barricade, her heart pounding. She had seen simulations, training battles, but nothing like this. This was survival. This was war. When the smoke cleared for a moment, Grant climbed atop a damaged tank and signaled his unit. "Forward. Push them back to the ridge." The soldiers roared in reply and followed. The line surged forward. Grant's voice echoed through the chaos. "Remember what you're fighting for. Hold the line." Vera followed behind, helping wounded soldiers and firing her plasma pistol when she could. Her fear began to fade, replaced by something new. Respect. Hours passed. The sun sank behind the clouds of smoke. The battle turned into a nightmare of endless waves. The crowd kept coming no matter how many fell. Supplies were running out. Ammunition was low. Grant stood at the command post studying the holomap. His armor was cracked, one arm bleeding, but he didn't seem to notice. "Captain," Vera said softly, "we can't hold them much longer. The orbital reinforcements are still hours away." He looked at her. His eyes were tired, but his voice was steady. "Then we buy those hours." She stared at him. "You'll die," he smiled faintly. "Maybe, but if we break, the whole defense breaks. Someone has to stand." Before she could argue, another explosion shook the ground. The enemy had breached the outer gate. Grant grabbed his helmet. "This is it. All units fall back to the central square. We make our last stand there." Vera followed as they retreated through the burning streets. Every building was in ruins. The square, once a peaceful plaza, was now covered in debris and corpses. Grant positioned the remaining soldiers behind wrecked vehicles and walls. He climbed onto a pile of rubble and raised the human flag that had fallen earlier. "This square is the heart of Varian 6, he shouted. "As long as we stand, this planet lives." The soldiers roared back, their fear replaced by determination. Even aliens from different worlds shouted in unison. Then the Krell came again. Dozens of their heavy mechs stormed forward, firing nonstop. The air turned white with plasma. Grant coordinated artillery strikes with perfect timing.
"Fire 3 now!"
Dropped the left flank. Explosions ripped through the enemy line. Still they advanced. Grant leaped down, rallying his troops. He fought side by side with them, shoulder to shoulder. Vera saw him cover a wounded alien, dragging them to safety under fire. He didn't care about species or rank, only survival. At one point, his armor was hit. He fell to one knee, clutching his chest. Vera ran toward him. "Captain." "You're hurt!" He gritted his teeth. "Not yet." He rose again, firing into the oncoming horde. Something in that moment burned into her mind forever. The image of one human standing against the impossible, refusing to surrender. Hours later, the sky finally split open. Reinforcement ships entered orbit, blasting the Krell lines with orbital strikes. The enemy began to retreat, dragging their dead and wounded. The remaining soldiers on the ground collapsed in exhaustion. Vera sat beside Grant on the battlefield. His armor was almost destroyed and his arm was bleeding badly, but he was alive. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved them." He looked at the smoking ruins around them. "We all did." "You kept fighting too," she shook her head. "No, Captain. I followed." "You led," he smiled weakly. "Leadership means standing up when no one else will." Vera looked at him closely. The man she had once mocked, the species she had called weak. He had just stood against death itself. The stories she had laughed at suddenly felt small compared to the truth. She whispered, "The legends didn't lie, did they?" Grant chuckled softly. "They always make us sound braver than we are. The truth is simpler. We're just too stubborn to quit." Vera felt tears in her eyes, though she didn't understand why. The galaxy had told her that humans were fragile, reckless, and emotional. Now she saw what that really meant. Fragility wasn't weakness, it was courage in disguise. The battlefield fell silent. Smoke drifted over broken walls. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned because one human refused to back down. Vera stood looking at the wounded soldiers being carried away. The human flag still fluttered weakly on the pile of rubble where Grant had planted it. She whispered to herself, "The galaxy will remember this day." "They'll remember him." Grant looked up at the dark sky. "They don't need to remember me. Just remember that humanity fights for everyone." That night, as rescue ships landed and medics rushed in, Vera stayed beside him. She watched as the stars returned through the smoke, bright and clear. For the first time, she understood the meaning of those old Terran words she once mocked: honor, duty, sacrifice. The battlefield was quiet now. Smoke and dust hung low over the ruined city of Varian 6. Alien soldiers and human troops moved among the wounded and debris, helping where they could. The Krell Dominion had retreated, licking their wounds and leaving the planet scarred but free. Virathil walked through the ruins, her steps slow. Every broken wall, every scorch mark, every fallen soldier reminded her of the chaos she had survived. Her chest still raced and her fingers shook slightly, but she could feel something new inside her, a deep respect she had never known before. She found Captain Elias Grant sitting quietly on a pile of rubble, his armor dented, scorched, and bloody. A medic hovered nearby, bandaging his arm. Grant didn't complain. He barely moved. His eyes scanned the horizon, calm yet alert. Virathil approached him slowly. "Captain," she began, her voice soft. I owe you thanks." Grant looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "For what?" he asked quietly. "For surviving," she said. "For leading. For showing me, showing everyone, what humans really are." He smiled faintly, a tired but genuine smile. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because someone had to. That's all humans ever do. We fight when we must, and we stand when everyone else is ready to fall." Virathil nodded slowly. She remembered the first day she had mocked the legends, laughing at stories she thought were exaggerated. She had believed humans were weak, reckless, and fragile. Now she saw the truth. The legends had not lied. They had only hinted at what humans were capable of. The next morning, the surviving soldiers gathered in the central square. The aliens, still wary of humans, now looked at them differently. They whispered among themselves, glancing at Grant and the human soldiers who had fought beside them. Virathil stood apart at first, watching quietly. She had a clear view of the humans. They moved with purpose, tending to wounded allies, giving encouragement, and organizing supplies. There was no arrogance, no boastful pride, only steady, methodical care, actions that spoke louder than words. She realized in that moment that humans had a kind of strength the galaxy rarely understood. It was not just about weapons or skill. It was about willpower, courage, and determination. A young Zalarian soldier approached Virathil, eyes wide. I thought humans were weak," he admitted. I was wrong. That one human," he nodded toward Grant. "He's incredible." Virathil smiled softly. "He's not incredible. He's human." The soldier blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Virathil said, looking at the human captain, that humanity survives because it refuses to give up. That is why they are legends, and why we should never underestimate them again. Later, in the command tent, Virathil sat with Grant. The noise of recovery operations filled the air, medics moving, soldiers talking, and distant alarms sounding as the planet stabilized. I used to think humans were exaggerating history, Virathil said quietly. I thought all those stories of wars and survival were myths. Grant nodded. Many of them are exaggerated, yes, but only in the way every story is. Heroes always seem larger than life. The truth is, humans are stubborn. We survive, we adapt. That's all. Virathil studied him carefully. You made it look so easy, he shook his head. Easy? Nothing about war is easy. Every decision, every step, every second, someone can die. We survive because we have to, not because it's easy. She realized then that it wasn't luck, instinct, or technology that made humans stand out. It was their refusal to accept failure, their will to fight, to protect, and to endure, even when the odds were impossible. The Galactic Council arrived on Varian 6 shortly afterward. Delegates from dozens of worlds came to assess the battle and evaluate the humans. Many aliens were skeptical, some openly hostile. During the briefing, Virathil stood beside Grant. She felt proud, though she didn't fully understand why. As the council listened to reports of the battle, they were forced to acknowledge something that had been ignored for centuries. Humans were unlike any other species in the galaxy. They fought not because they were stronger, but because they refused to stop. They led not because they sought glory, but because someone had to. Virathil watched the council's faces as they digested the reports. Shock, awe, and reluctant respect crossed the room. She smiled quietly to herself. Humans had earned something more than survival that day. They had earned recognition. That evening, Virathil and Grant walked together through the quiet city ruins. The fires had burned down, leaving only smoke and ash. The stars shone bright above, untouched by the chaos below. You know, Virathil began, I once mocked your kind. I thought humans were weak. I laughed at the legends. I didn't believe a single word of it. Grant looked at her calmly. I know, she continued, I was wrong. I understand now. The legends didn't lie. They didn't exaggerate. They only told part of the story. He nodded slowly. Part of the story is enough. It inspires those who see it, but it's not about legend. It's about action. Every human soldier stands because they have to. That's the story you should remember. Virathil glanced at him. I will. I'll tell the galaxy what I've seen. I'll make them believe, Grant smiled faintly. Good, the galaxy needs to remember. Not for us, but for everyone we protect. In the following weeks, Virathil stayed with human units, observing their training, their interactions, and their discipline. She noticed something remarkable. Humans, despite being smaller, weaker, and often outnumbered, worked together in ways other species could not. They used ingenuity, cooperation, and sheer determination to achieve what others could not. She began documenting everything she saw, their battlefield instincts, their decision-making under pressure, their unyielding resolve. Her reports became the most studied materials in the Academy, a new guide to understanding human warfare. Aliens who once laughed at humanity now studied them with seriousness. Solarians, Ur and Torth. All species began to realize that humans were not just survivors. They were strategists, warriors and leaders in their own right. One day, as Virathil watched human recruits train, she felt a surge of pride and awe. The new soldiers moved with determination, learning from veterans, including Grant. She realized the galaxy would never again underestimate humans. She approached Grant, who was giving instructions to a squad of trainees. Do you ever tire of this? She asked. He shook his head. No, training them is part of survival. Every person we prepare is another life saved, another victory for the galaxy. Virathil nodded. She had seen it firsthand. Humans didn't fight for glory. They fought for each other and for everyone else who couldn't. She smiled softly. I once mocked the legends of human warriors, she said. Now, I carry one in my heart. Grant looked at her with a quiet acknowledgement. Then you understand. Months later, the Galactic Council formally recognized humans as strategic defense partners. Their tactics, courage, and battlefield instincts were unmatched by any other species. Virathil attended the ceremony, standing proudly beside Grant. The alien delegates gave reluctant applause, while human soldiers held their heads high. During the ceremony, she reflected on her journey, from skeptic to witness, from mocker to believer. Humans had not only survived, they had reshaped how the galaxy saw courage, determination, and heroism. When the ceremony ended, Virathil walked beside Grant, looking at the crowd of humans and aliens alike. "I hope the galaxy never forgets," she said. Grant smiled. "They won't. As long as there are humans, they'll remember. And if they don't, we'll remind them." Virathil nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had learned something powerful. Humans were not just fighters, they were symbols of hope. As she looked at the stars above, she whispered quietly, a promise to herself and to the galaxy. "The legends were true, and now I will make sure everyone knows it."